The Kobali archaeologists would painfully regret the moment they brought the frozen human back from the dead. They didn't know their fatal mistake would unleash humanity's vengeful wrath across the universe once again. Dr. Ymir gripped his plasma chisel with a trembling appendage as flecks of ancient ice sprayed his exoskeleton. His mandibles clacked nervously. After centuries of digging through Earth's barren Arctic wastes, his team had finally uncovered their legendary prize, a remarkably preserved male human, still sealed within a cryostasis chamber. Carbon dating confirmed the impossible. This Derek Simmons had been frozen for over 5,000 years, offering an unprecedented chance to study the long-extinct warriors who once dominated the galaxy. But the unsettling rumors of humanity's predatory violence and planet-razing rampages made Ymir's ichor run cold. Against Ymir's dire warnings, the Consortium Council demanded the human be revived for research. In a hermetically sealed lab, Ymir watched in breathless apprehension as the human's eyes fluttered open for the first time in millennia and locked onto his with a piercing, predatory glare. Ymir's research could make him the most renowned xenoanthropologist in history if this human specimen didn't slaughter him and every Kobali on the ship first. Derek's eyes darted around the sterile laboratory, his legs shaking as it tried to process the impossible situation. Strange, insectoid creatures surrounded him, their exoskeletons glinting under the harsh lighting. Panic rose in his throat, his heart pounding against his ribs. He tried to move, but his muscles felt weak and unresponsive, atrophied from centuries of disuse. The creatures chattered amongst themselves, their language a discordant series of clicks and hisses that grated on Derek's ears. One of them, slightly larger than the others, approached him cautiously, holding out a spindly appendage, as if to calm him. Derek flinched away, his instincts screaming at him to fight or flee. Ymir watched the human's reactions with a mix of fascination and trepidation. He could see the fear and confusion in Derek's eyes, the way his muscles tensed beneath his pale skin. Ymir gestured to his team, trying to convey that they should give the human space, but it was too late. Derek lashed out, his fist connecting with the nearest Kobali's exoskeleton with a sickening crunch. The scientist stumbled back, ichor oozing from the crack in its carapace. Derek tried to press his advantage, but his legs gave out beneath him, sending him sprawling to the floor. "Sedate him," Ymir commanded, his voice trembling slightly. Two of his team members rushed forward, injecting Derek with a fast-acting sedative. The human's struggles grew weaker until he finally lay still, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Ymir turned to his injured colleague, assessing the damage. "You underestimated him," he chided, his tone sharp. "We all did. We must remember that this is a human, a species known for their aggression and unpredictability." Hours later, Derek's eyes fluttered open once more. He found himself restrained, his wrists and ankles bound to the examination table. Ymir stood nearby, a strange device held in his appendages. "Can you understand me?" Ymir asked. His voice filtered through the neural translator. Derek blinked, surprised to hear the alien speaking in perfect English. He nodded slowly, licking his dry lips. "Where am I? What's going on?" Ymir hesitated, knowing the news he was about to deliver would be difficult for the human to process. "You have been in cryostasis for over 5,000 years, he explained gently. "Humanity, as you knew it, is gone, extinct. Earth is now inhabited by various alien races, including mine, the Kobali." Derek's eyes widened, disbelief and horror warring on his features. "That's impossible," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "What happened to us? To Earth?" "We don't know," Ymir admitted. "Very little information survives from that time period. We were hoping you could shed some light on the matter." Derek strained against his restraints, desperation creeping into his voice. "Let me go. I need to see for myself. I need to find out what happened to my people." Ymir shook his head, his expression firm. "I'm afraid I can't do that. Until we can be certain that you pose no threat to yourself or others, you must remain in our custody. We will do everything in our power to help you acclimate to this new reality, but it will take time. Derek slumped back against the table, defeat and anger simmering beneath the surface. He would play along for now, but in the back of his mind, a plan began to take shape. He would find a way to escape this alien prison and uncover the truth about humanity's fate, despite the toll. In the days that followed, Derek found himself subjected to a barrage of physical and mental evaluations. Kobali scientists poked and prodded at him, taking samples and running tests that left him feeling more like a lab rat than a human being. They measured his strength, his reflexes, his cognitive abilities, all while keeping him under constant surveillance. Despite his growing frustration, Derek knew he had to play along for now. He was outnumbered and outmatched, with no way to escape the high-tech facility where he was being held. So he cooperated, gritting his teeth through the endless rounds of questioning and examination. In between tests, Emir provided Derek with educational materials to help him understand the world he had woken up to. Derek pored over the holographic displays, his eyes widening as he took in the incredible advancements the alien races had made. Their technology was like something out of a science fiction novel, faster than light travel, advanced AI, even the ability to terraform entire planets. But as he delved deeper, Derek noticed a curious absence. There was little mention of exploration or expansion, of pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Instead, the alien cultures seemed to have turned inward, focusing on stability and the acquisition of knowledge for its own sake. "Why don't you explore more?" Derek asked Emir one day, as the Kobali scientist was guiding him through a lesson on interstellar politics. "With the technology you have, you could be out there discovering new worlds, new civilizations." Thymir's antennae twitched, a gesture Derek had come to recognize as a sign of discomfort. "We have found that such endeavors often lead to conflict and instability," he explained. "It is better to focus on understanding and improving ourselves rather than seeking to dominate others." Derek frowned, a nagging sense of unease growing in the pit of his stomach. Something about Emir's explanation didn't sit right with him. As he continued his studies, that feeling only intensified. The more he learned about humanity's supposed extinction, the more questions he had. The official records were vague and contradictory, offering little in the way of concrete details. And when he pressed Emir for more information, the Kobali scientist always seemed to change the subject or give evasive answers. Derek began to suspect that the aliens were hiding something from him. Maybe they knew more about what had happened to humanity than they were letting on. Or maybe they had played a role in his species' downfall themselves. He knew he couldn't trust Emir or the other Kobali, no matter how friendly they tried to be. He had to find a way to escape, to get back to Earth and uncover the truth for himself. So Derek started to plan, biding his time and gathering what information he could. He memorized the layout of the facility, noting the locations of security cameras and guard patrols. He eavesdropped on conversations, picking up snippets of the Kobali language and trying to decipher their strange clicking dialect. And all the while he played the part of the cooperative subject, never letting on that he was plotting his escape. He would find a way out of this alien prison, one way or another, and when he did, he would stop at nothing to discover what had really happened to his people. Derek's chance to break free came sooner than expected. Emir informed him that a routine medical procedure was necessary to address some lingering health concerns from his extended cryo-sleep. As the Kobali medical staff strapped him to the operating table and began their preparations, Derek seized his moment. With a burst of strength that surprised even himself, Derek wrenched free of his restraints. He lashed out at the nearest Kobali, sending them crashing into a tray of surgical instruments. Alarms blared as Derek snatched a scalpel and held it threateningly, his eyes darting around the room for an escape route. More Kobali rushed in, but Derek was ready. His muscles seemed to remember combat techniques he had learned long ago, and he dispatched the aliens with brutal efficiency. He grabbed a more substantial weapon from one of the fallen guards and fought his way out of the medical wing, leaving a trail of injured Kobali in his wake. Emir's voice echoed over the intercom, ordering a full lockdown of the facility. Derek knew he had little time before the entire compound was swarming with armed security. He raced through the twisting corridors, his heart pounding in his chest. As he turned a corner, Derek spotted a heavily reinforced door marked with warning signs in the Kobali language. His instincts told him that whatever lay behind that door was important. He fired his stolen weapon at the lock, the advanced alien alloy giving way under the barrage. Inside, Derek found himself standing in a cavernous room filled with rows upon rows of servers and databanks. He approached one of the terminals, his fingers flying over the unfamiliar controls. To his surprise, his outdated hacking skills still proved effective against the alien technology. What he found in the Kobali files made his blood run cold. The aliens had been studying humanity for centuries, long before they claimed to have discovered him. Their knowledge of human history, culture, and biology was far more extensive than Emir had led him to believe. But it was the cryptic references to a cataclysmic event that really caught Derek's attention. The files hinted at some kind of disaster that had wiped out human civilization, an event that the Kobali seemed to have had a hand in. Derek's mind reeled at the implications. Just as he was about to dig deeper, the door to the data center exploded inward. Emir stormed in, flanked by a team of heavily armed Kobali security. Derek barely had time to react before they opened fire, energy bolts scorching the air around him. Derek returned fire, but he knew he was outmatched. He spotted a maintenance hatch in the floor and made a split-second decision. With a final spray of covering fire, Derek yanked open the hatch and dropped into the dark tunnel below, the angry shouts of the Kobali echoing behind him. He ran blindly through the maintenance shafts, his mind racing with the revelations he had uncovered. The Kobali had been lying to him from the start. They knew something about humanity's extinction, and Derek was determined to find out the truth, whatever it takes. Derek's heart pounded as he raced through the winding corridors of the Kobali compound, the shouts of his pursuers echoing behind him. He ducked into a side passage, his stolen weapon clutched tightly in his hands. As he rounded a corner, he skidded to a halt, his eyes widening at the sight before him. A massive hangar stretched out in front of him, filled with sleek alien spacecraft. Derek's mind raced as he realized the implications. If he could commandeer one of these ships, he could escape not just the compound, but the entire planet. He could finally start searching for the truth about what had happened to humanity. Derek crept forward, keeping to the shadows as he scanned the hangar for any signs of Kobali personnel. He spotted a lone pilot entering a small, streamlined ship near the far end of the bay. Derek's muscles tensed as he prepared to make his move. With a burst of speed, Derek sprinted across the open space, his footsteps ringing on the metal floor. The Kobali pilot barely had time to register the human's presence before Derek was upon him. A swift blow to the head sent the alien crumpling to the ground, his weapon clattering beside him. Derek leaped into the ship's cockpit, his eyes darting over the unfamiliar controls. The technology was far beyond anything he had encountered in his own time, but he didn't have the luxury of a learning curve. He would have to rely on his wits and adaptability to get him through. As Derek's fingers flew over the console, the ship hummed to life around him. Displays flickered on, showing readouts and diagrams that he could only guess at. But there, in the center of the control panel, was a symbol he recognized from his time in the Kobali data center, the icon for a hyper-jump drive. Derek's heart raced as he initiated the launch sequence, the ship's engines roaring to life. He could hear shouts of alarm from outside as the Kobali security forces finally caught up to him. Energy bolts sizzled against the ship's hull, but Derek ignored them, focusing on the rapidly opening hangar doors ahead. With a final desperate push of the throttle, Derek sent the ship rocketing out of the hangar and into the sky. The force of the acceleration slammed him back against his seat, but he maintained his grip on the controls. He watched in amazement as the Earth fell away beneath him, the blue and green of the planet's surface giving way to the inky blackness of space. Derek let out a shaky breath as he realized the magnitude of what he had just done. He was free, But he was also utterly alone, adrift in a galaxy that had long since moved on without humanity. The weight of his mission settled on his shoulders like a physical burden. He turned his attention to the ship's navigation system, scanning for any sign of a non-Kobali settled world. He knew he would need allies if he was going to uncover the truth about humanity's fate. The computer pinged, indicating a potential destination, and Derek set the coordinates with a sense of fierce dedication. As the ship prepared for the hyperjump, Derek's mind wandered back to the fragments of information he had gleaned from the Kobali data center. The references to a cataclysmic event, the hints of some greater mystery surrounding humanity's disappearance. He knew he was only scratching the surface of a much larger puzzle. Other stars outside the cockpit stretched into long, shimmering lines as the ship entered hyperspace. Derek leaned back in his seat, his mind racing with possibilities. He didn't know what challenges lay ahead, but he knew one thing for certain. He would stop at nothing to uncover the truth and ensure that humanity's legacy was not forgotten. On Earth, Ymir stared at the display in front of him, his antennae twitching with agitation. The human had escaped, and with him, any hope of a peaceful resolution to this situation. Ymir knew he would have to act quickly if he was going to contain the potential fallout. He turned to his subordinates, his voice grave. "Initiate Protocol Zeta," he ordered. "I want all available resources dedicated to tracking down the human. We cannot allow him to disrupt the delicate balance we have worked so hard to maintain." As the Kobali scrambled to comply with his orders, Ymir turned his gaze back to the display, watching the blinking dot that represented Derek's ship as it vanished into hyperspace. He knew the stakes were higher than ever now. The human represented a threat, not just to the Kobali, but to the entire galactic order. Ymir steeled himself for the challenges ahead, knowing that he would have to use every tool at his disposal to bring Derek back into custody. He just hoped that he could do so before the human uncovered the secrets that the Kobali had worked so hard to keep buried. Derek guided his stolen Kobali ship into the bustling spaceport, his eyes scanning the crowded docks for any signs of trouble. The place was a hive of activity, with ships of all shapes and sizes coming and going, their crews a motley assortment of aliens from across the galaxy. As Derek disembarked, he couldn't help but feel exposed. His human features stood out like a beacon among the sea of unfamiliar faces. He pulled up the hood of his cloak, trying to blend in as he made his way through the throng of travelers. A sudden commotion caught his attention. A group of rough-looking mercenaries were roughing up a hapless merchant, their leader, a hulking brute with a scarred face, holding the poor creature by the throat. "I told you I don't have the credits," the merchant squealed, his voice imbued with panic. The mercenary leader sneered, his grip tightening. "Then maybe we'll just take our payment in blood." Derek's fists clenched at his sides. He knew he should keep a low profile, but he couldn't just stand by and watch this injustice unfold. He stepped forward, his voice cutting through the din of the spaceport. "Let him go." The mercenaries turned, their eyes narrowing as they took in the sight of the hooded figure before them. The leader released his grip on the merchant, who scurried away in terror. "And who the hell are you?" the leader growled, his hand dropping to the blaster at his hip. Derek slowly lowered his hood, revealing his human features. The mercenaries recoiled in shock, their eyes widening. "A human," one of them muttered, his voice tinged with disbelief. The leader, however, seemed more intrigued than surprised. He stepped forward, his eyes raking over Derek's form. Well, he said, his voice a low rumble. "Looks like we've got ourselves a rarity here, boys. A genuine bona fide human. Thought your kind were extinct." Derek stood his ground, his gaze unwavering. "Not quite." The leader's eyes narrowed, a calculating look crossing his scarred features. "The name's Orcs, and I think you and I might have some business to discuss." Derek hesitated, his instincts warring with his need for allies. He knew he couldn't trust these mercenaries, but he also knew he couldn't afford to pass up any potential leads. "So I'm listening," he said, his voice carefully neutral. Zorix grinned, his teeth flashing in the dim light of the spaceport. "Not here, follow me." He turned and strode off, his crew falling into step behind him. Derek hesitated for a moment before following, his hand never straying far from his own weapon. They wound their way through the crowded streets, eventually arriving at a seedy-looking bar nestled in the heart of the spaceport's underbelly. Zorrox led the way inside, his presence parting the crowd with minimal resistance. He gestured for Derek to take a seat at a battered table in the corner, his crew fanning out to keep watch. Derek sat, his eyes never leaving Zorrox's scarred face. "So human," Zorrox said, leaning back in his chair. "What brings you to this shithole of a spaceport?" Derek considered his words carefully. He knew he needed Zorrox's help, but he also knew that trust was a rare commodity in this new galaxy. "I am looking for information," he said, his voice low, "about the Kobali and their role in humanity's disappearance." Zorrox's eyes narrowed, his interest clearly piqued. "And what makes you think they had anything to do with it?" Derek leaned forward, his voice intense. "Because I've seen their records. I know they've been studying us for centuries, long before they claim to have discovered me. And I know they're hiding something about what really happened to my species." Zorrox was silent for a long moment, his gaze searching Derek's face. Finally he nodded, a slow grin spreading across his features. "All right, human," he said, his voice a low growl. "You've got my attention, but if we're going to work together, I'm going to need something in return." Derek's heart raced, but he kept his expression carefully neutral. "What did you have in mind?" Zorrox leaned forward, his eyes glinting in the dim light of the bar. "Any information or technology we uncover, I get a share. And if we find anything particularly valuable, I get first dibs on the sale." Derek hesitated, his mind racing. He knew he was taking a risk, but he also knew he couldn't do this alone. Finally he nodded, his expression resolute. "Deal." Zorrox grinned, his teeth flashing in the darkness. "Excellent. Now let's talk about where we start." As Derek and Zorrox began to plan their next move, a flicker of movement caught Derek's eye. He turned, his gaze settling on a cloaked figure hunched over a nearby table. The figure seemed to be listening intently to their conversation, their features obscured by a heavy hood. Derek's instinct screamed at him to be wary, but before he could act, the figure stood abruptly and slipped away into the crowded bar. Derek turned back to Zorrox, his voice low and urgent. "We need to move. I think we're being watched." Zorrox nodded, his expression grim. "I've got a safe house on the outskirts of the port. We can regroup there and plan our next move." As they made their way out of the bar and into the bustling streets of the spaceport, Derek couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. He kept his hand close to his weapon, his senses on high alert. Little did he know that high above the spaceport, a Kobali ship was descending through the atmosphere, its sensors locked onto the faint signal of Derek's stolen craft. On board, Emir watched the readouts with an iron will, his mind racing with the implications of the human's escape. He knew he had to act quickly if he was going to prevent Derek from uncovering the truth about humanity's fate, and he knew that the key to doing so lay in the whispers of a secret Kobali facility, hidden somewhere in the depths of space. As the two groups raced towards their destinies, the hope of the universe hung in the balance, the secrets of the past threatening to unleash a storm that would shake the very foundations of the universe. Derek's heart pounded as he and Zorrox's team crept through the dimly lit corridors of the secret Kobali facility. The air was thick with the hum of machinery and the acrid scent of chemicals. Zorrox held up a hand, signaling for the group to halt as he peered around a corner. "Two guards," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the ambient noise. "Heavily armed." Derek nodded, his grip tightening on his weapon. They had come too far to turn back now. With a silent gesture, Zorrox gave the signal to move. The team burst around the corner, weapons blazing. The Kobali guards fell before they could even raise their own rifles. As they pushed deeper into the facility, the true nature of the Kobali's work became increasingly clear. Glass tanks lined the walls, filled with grotesque, half-formed creatures that could only be the result of genetic experimentation. Computer screens displayed schematics for advanced weapons systems, while holographic projectors showed simulations of planets being consumed by unnatural disasters. Derek felt bile rising in his throat as he realized the scale of the Kobalis' machinations. They had been playing God, manipulating the very fabric of life and death, and at the center of it all, the fate of humanity. They reached a central data hub, and Zorok set to work hacking into the system. Derek watched over his shoulder, his eyes widening as file after file spilled across the screen. There, laid bare in cold, clinical detail, was the truth he had sought for so long. The Kobali had known about the impending cataclysm that would wipe out humanity. More than that, they had engineered it, seeing humanity's aggressive expansion as a threat to their own power. They had seeded Earth with viruses, triggered natural disasters, and sown chaos and conflict, all while carefully preserving samples of human DNA for their own twisted experiments. Derek felt a wave of rage and despair wash over him. His entire species, reduced to nothing more than lab rats in the Kobali's sick games. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could utter a word, alarms began to blare throughout the facility. "We've been detected," Zorok shouted, his fingers flying over the console as he tried to lock down the data. "Grab what you can and prepare to fight." Chaos erupted as Kobali security forces poured into the room, their weapons spitting deadly energy beams. Derek and the others dove for cover, returning fire with everything they had. The air filled with the stench of ozone and burned flesh as bodies fell on both sides. In the midst of the firefight, Derek found himself separated from the others, cut off by a wall of Kobali soldiers. He fought like a man possessed, his weapon bucking in his hands as he cut down enemy after enemy. But for everyone he killed, 2 more seemed to take their place, their genetically enhanced bodies shrugging off wounds that would have felled a normal being. Just as he thought he would be overwhelmed, a familiar figure stepped through the smoke and chaos. Ymir, his exoskeleton gleaming under the flickering lights, his eyes fixed on Derek with a mixture of anger and something almost like regret. "It didn't have to be this way," Ymir said, his voice carrying over the din of battle. "If you had just accepted your place, accepted the necessity of what we did." "Necessary?" Derek spat, his voice raw with emotion. "You committed genocide. You played God with the lives of billions." "We did what we had to do to ensure the stability of the galaxy," Ymir replied, his tone maddeningly calm. "Humanity's aggression, your reckless expansion, you were a threat to everything we had built." Derek felt something snap inside him, a lifetime of rage and grief boiling over. With a wordless cry, he lunged at Ymir, his weapon forgotten. The two clashed in a flurry of blows, Derek's raw strength pitted against Ymir's genetically enhanced reflexes. They crashed through the melee, heedless of the fighting around them, locked in their own desperate struggle. Derek poured all of his pain, all of his fury into every punch, every kick. Ymir met him blow for blow, his exoskeleton absorbing the worst of the impacts. As they grappled, the world around them seemed to fade away, the sounds of battle becoming distant and muffled. In that moment, they were the only 2 beings in the universe, a man fighting for the memory of his lost species, and a creature trying to justify the unjustifiable. The station shook with the force of distant explosions, the very air seeming to tremble. Somewhere, Zorok and the others were still fighting, still trying to escape with the damning evidence they had uncovered. But for Derek, there was only the fight, only the desperate need to make Ymir pay for his crimes. They slammed against a bank of computers, sparks flying as screens shattered and equipment crumpled. Ymir's exoskeleton was cracked and leaking ichor, but still he fought on, his blows coming faster and harder. Derek's vision swam, his body battered and bruised, but he refused to yield. With a final desperate surge of strength, Derek seized Ymir by the throat, his fingers tightening around the Kobali's neck. Ymir's eyes bulged, his mandibles clicking frantically as he struggled for air. "This is for humanity," Derek growled, his voice barely recognizable to his own ears. "For every life you stole, every world you destroyed." Ymir's exoskeleton creaked under the pressure, hairline fractures spreading across its surface. The Kobali's struggles grew weaker, his limbs twitching spasmodically. Just as Derek thought it was over, Ymir's hand shot out, a hidden blade slipping from his wrist. The blade plunged into Derek's side, cold fire spreading through his veins. Derek roared in pain and rage, his grip on Ymir's throat tightening convulsively. With a sickening crunch, Ymir's exoskeleton gave way, ichor spraying across Derek's face. The Kobali went limp, his eyes dulling as the life drained from his body. Derek staggered back, his hand pressed to his bleeding side. Around him the battle still raged, energy beams crisscrossing the air. He could hear Zorok shouting orders, could see his team fighting their way towards the exit. But his own strength was fading fast, the edges of his vision darkening. Derek slumped against a shattered console, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He had done it. He had avenged his species, had uncovered the truth of the Kobali's crimes. But at what cost? As consciousness slipped away, Derek's last thoughts were of Earth, of the blue skies and green fields he would never see again. He had fought for humanity's memory, but in the end, he knew that he too would be forgotten, just another casualty in an uncaring universe. The darkness closed in and Derek knew no more. Derek and Ymir crashed through the facility, their battle tearing through delicate equipment and vital systems. Sparks flew as they smashed into control panels, alarms blaring in response to the damage. Derek's vision blurred, his body battered and bruised, but he clung to consciousness through sheer force of will. Ymir's exoskeleton was in ruins, ichor oozing from a dozen wounds, but still he fought on. They grappled in the heart of the facility's power core, a massive chamber thrumming with barely contained energy. Derek's fist slammed into a pulsing conduit, sending a cascade of sparks raining down on them. Suddenly the chamber shuddered, the power core letting out an ominous whine. Ymir's eyes widened, fear replacing rage in an instant. "You fool!" he hissed, shoving Derek away. "You've destabilized the core." Derek staggered back, his knees going weak as the implications sank in. The facility shook again, more violently this time, as the power core began to overload. Ymir turned and fled, his battered form disappearing into the chaos. Alarms shrieked as the core reached critical levels. Derek stumbled through the shaking corridors, the floor buckling beneath his feet. He had to find Zorok and the others, had to escape before the whole place came down on their heads. He found them pinned down in a hangar bay, trading fire with a squad of Kobali soldiers. Derek hurled himself into the fray, his weapon spitting plasma as he fought his way to his allies' side. "We have to go," he yelled over the din of battle. "The whole place is going to blow." Zorok nodded grimly, barking orders to his team. They fought their way to their waiting ship, the hangar collapsing around them as the facility tore itself apart. Derek's heart pounded as he threw himself into the pilot's seat, his fingers flying over the controls. The ship roared to life, blasting out of the hangar just as the facility exploded behind them. The shockwave slammed into the ship, sending it tumbling end over end. Derek fought with the controls, struggling to regain stability as his vision grayed out. Finally, the ship leveled out, the stars spinning dizzyingly outside the viewports. Derek slumped back in his seat, his breath coming in ragged gasps. They had made it, but only just. As the adrenaline faded, the weight of what he had learned crashed down on him. Humanity's extinction, the genocide of his entire species, orchestrated by the very beings who had claimed to be their saviors. It was too much to process, too much to bear. Zorok eyed him from the co-pilot's seat, his expression unreadable. "The Kobali didn't destroy humanity because they wanted to," he said quietly. "They did it because they were afraid." Derek looked at him sharply, anger and confusion warring in his gut. Zorok gestured to the wreckage of the facility, still visible on the interface. "You saw what they were doing in there, the lengths they were willing to go to keep their secrets. They weren't just afraid of humanity, they were terrified. Derek shook his head, trying to make sense of it all. But why? Why would they be so afraid of us? Think about it, Zorrox pressed. Humanity was expanding rapidly, consuming resources, developing technologies at an unprecedented rate. The Kobali saw where that path would lead, saw the potential for humanity to become a threat to the entire galaxy. Derek felt sick, his stomach twisting with revulsion. So they wiped us out, just like that. They thought they had no choice. Zorrox's voice was grim, and maybe they were right. Maybe humanity was too dangerous to be allowed to survive. Derek clenched his fists, rage and grief burning in his chest. He couldn't accept that, couldn't let the Kobali's crimes go unanswered. He had to find a way to make them pay, to ensure that humanity's legacy would never be forgotten. "Set a course for the Outer Rim," he said, his voice hard as steel. "We need to regroup to plan our next move." As the ship leaped into hyperspace, Derek stared out at the swirling vortex of light, his mind racing with the challenges ahead. He didn't know what the future would hold, but he knew one thing for certain. He would not rest until the truth was known, until the galaxy understood the full extent of the Kobali's crimes. The weight of that responsibility settled on his shoulders, a burden he would carry for the rest of his days. But he would not falter, would not give in to despair. For the sake of his lost species, for the memory of all those who had been erased from existence, he would fight on at any expense. In the dingy backroom of a seedy bar on a lawless space station, Derek hunched over a battered table, poring over a holomap of the galaxy. Zorrox and the others gathered around, nursing drinks and studying the glowing star systems intently. "We need proof," Derek muttered, his finger tracing a path through the holographic stars. "Hard evidence of what the Kobali did. Without that, it's just our word against theirs." Zorrox nodded, his scarred face grim. "And we need a way to get that proof out there. Even if we find something, it won't mean shit if the Kobali can bury it." The team fell silent, each lost in thought. They had managed to escape the destruction of the secret Kobali facility, but they knew their fight was far from finished. The Kobali would stop at nothing to keep their secrets hidden. Suddenly, the door to the back room burst open. A wiry, furtive-looking alien, with pale, almost translucent skin, stumbled in, his eyes darting nervously around the room. "I hear you're looking for information," he rasped, his voice barely above a whisper. "About the Kobali, about humans." Derek was on his feet in an instant, his hand hovering over his weapon. "What do you know?" The alien licked his thin lips, his gaze flicking between Derek and the others. "There are rumors," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "whispers, really, of other humans, survivors like you." Derek's heart pounded in his chest. Other survivors? It seemed impossible, but then again so had his own existence just a short time ago. "Where?" he demanded, taking a step towards the alien. "Where are they?" The alien flinched back, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "I don't know for sure," he said quickly, "but I've heard stories of humans in stasis, hidden away on remote worlds, waiting to be found." Derek exchanged a glance with Zorrox, a silent understanding passing between them. If there were other humans out there, they had to find them. They had to bring them together, to rebuild what had been lost. "How do we find them?" Zorrox asked, his voice low and intense. The alien hesitated, his eyes darting to the door. "I might know someone," he said finally. "Someone who could help, but it won't be easy or cheap." Derek leaned forward, his eyes locked on the alien's. "We'll pay whatever it takes," he said, his voice firm. "Just tell us what we need to do." As the alien began to outline a plan, Derek felt a new sense of purpose settling over him. He wasn't just fighting for the memory of humanity anymore. He was fighting for its future. But even as hope bloomed in his chest, Derek knew that their mission had just become infinitely more complicated. The Kobali, now aware of his knowledge and the threat he posed, would be more determined than ever to stop him. Back on Earth, Ymir paced the length of his command center. his exoskeleton clicking with each agitated step. The disastrous raid on the secret facility had left him facing harsh questions from his superiors. They demanded answers, and more importantly, results. "We cannot allow the human to continue unchecked," one of the Kobali leaders said, her holographic image towering over Ymir. "He poses a grave threat to the stability of our society, to the very fabric of the galactic order." Ymir bowed his head, his mandibles twitching. "I understand," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "I will not fail you again." As the hologram flickered out, Ymir turned to his subordinates, his eyes hard. "Assemble a task force," he ordered, his voice brooking no argument. "Our best soldiers, our most advanced technology. We will hunt the human down and bring him to justice, despite the toll." The subordinates scurried to obey, leaving Ymir alone with his thoughts. He knew that he was walking a dangerous line. The human had already proven himself to be more resourceful and determined than anyone had anticipated. If he were to find other survivors, to unite them under a common cause. Ymir shook his head, pushing the thought aside. He could not allow himself to consider such possibilities. The human would be found, and the truth would be buried, just as it always had been. The Kobali way of life would be preserved at any expense. As the task force assembled and ships prepared for launch, Ymir steeled himself for the hunt to come. The human had no idea what he was up against. The full might of the Kobali Empire would be brought to bear, and nothing would stand in their way. Light years away, Derek and his team prepared for their own mission. They would follow the leads provided by their new informant, chasing down every rumor and whisper until they found the truth. And if there were other survivors out there, Derek would find them, and together they would reclaim their place among the stars. The race was on, a desperate battle between those seeking to preserve the status quo and those fighting for the very survival of their species. As Derek and his team set out into the vast expanse of the galaxy, they knew that every moment counted. They had to stay one step ahead of Ymir and his task force, had to uncover the secrets that the Kobali had tried so hard to keep hidden. But even as the dangers mounted and the odds seemed insurmountable, Derek felt a flicker of hope burning in his chest. Humanity was not dead, not yet, and he would fight with every fiber of his being to ensure that it would never be forgotten again. Derek's heart pounded with anticipation as the ship descended through the cloudy atmosphere of the uncharted planet. Zorrox guided the craft towards the coordinates they had uncovered, his brow furrowed in concentration. As they broke through the cloud cover, Derek gasped at the sight before him. Their vast settlement stretched out across the landscape, its buildings gleaming in the sun. It was a far cry from the ruined cities and desolate wastelands he had seen on other worlds. Here there was life, vibrant and thriving. The ship touched down on the outskirts of the settlement, and Derek was the first to disembark. He took a deep breath, the air sweet and clean in his lungs. Zorrox and the others followed close behind, their weapons at the ready. As they approached the settlement, a group of humans emerged to greet them. They were led by a striking woman with fiery red hair and piercing green eyes. She carried herself with an air of authority, her posture straight and proud. "Welcome," she said, her voice ringing out clear and strong. "I am Arya, leader of this settlement. We've been expecting you." Derek stepped forward, his heart racing. "You knew we were coming." Arya smiled, but there was a hardness in her eyes. "We have our ways. Come, there is much to discuss." She led them into the heart of the settlement, past bustling streets and thriving gardens. Derek marveled at the ingenuity and resourcefulness of these survivors who had carved out a life for themselves in the depths of space. As they walked, Derek shared his story, the betrayal of the Kobali, the destruction of the secret facility, his quest to find other survivors. Arya listened intently, her expression unreadable. Finally, they arrived at a large central building, its walls adorned with intricate murals depicting the history of humanity. Inside, Arya led them to a spacious meeting room, where a group of men and women were already gathered. "This is my inner circle," Arya said, gesturing to the assembled group. the leaders of our community. Derek looked around the room, taking in the faces of these survivors. They were a diverse group with skin tones and features from all corners of old Earth. But there was something else, something that set them apart. They moved with a fluid grace, their bodies honed to perfection. Their eyes gleamed with a sharp intelligence, their gazes piercing and intense. Derek felt a chill run down his spine. Arya began to speak, her voice filled with passion and conviction. She spoke of the Kobali's betrayal, of the need for humanity to reclaim its rightful place in the galaxy. Derek found himself nodding along, swept up in her charisma. But as the meeting went on, he began to notice something else. The way Arya and her inner circle spoke of their plans, of the power they would wield. The casual mentions of the advanced technology they had acquired, the enhancements they had made to their own bodies. A sinking feeling settled in Derek's gut. He had seen this before, in the twisted experiments of the Kobali, the desire for power, the willingness to sacrifice anything and anyone to achieve it. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This is wrong," he said, his voice shaking with anger. "Can't you see that you're becoming just like the Kobali, seeking to dominate, to control?" Arya's eyes flashed with anger. "You dare question us? We are the future of humanity, Derek. We will take back what is ours despite the toll." Derek shook his head, backing away. "Not like this. Not if it means becoming the very thing we fought against." The room erupted into chaos, voices raised in anger and accusation. Derek's team rallied around him, their weapons drawn. Arya's inner circle tensed, ready for a fight. And then the world exploded. The walls of the building shook as explosions ripped through the settlement. Derek's heart stopped. Ymir had found them. He raced outside, his team close behind. The settlement was in chaos, buildings burning and people screaming. Kobali soldiers swarmed the streets, their weapons cutting down anyone in their path. Derek spotted Arya in the midst of the fighting, her body a blur of motion as she cut through the Kobali with inhuman speed and strength. Her inner circle fought alongside her, their enhanced bodies granting them an edge over their enemies. For a moment Derek was tempted. With their power they could crush the Kobali, could take back the galaxy for humanity. But then he saw the look in Arya's eyes, the cruel twist of her lips. She was reveling in the slaughter, lost to her own twisted vision. Derek made his choice. He turned his back on Arya and her augmented humans, rallying his team to fight against the Kobali. They would find another way, a path that didn't lead to more bloodshed and tyranny. The battle raged on, the streets running red with blood. Derek fought with everything he had, his weapon blazing and his heart pounding, but it wasn't enough. A Kobali soldier caught him with a glancing blow, sending him tumbling to the ground. His weapon skittered away, lost in the chaos. The soldier loomed over him, his weapon aimed at Derek's heart. But before he could fire, a blast of energy caught him in the chest, sending him flying. Derek looked up, his eyes widening. Ymir stood over him, his own weapon smoking. "Get up!" Ymir growled, reaching down to haul Derek to his feet. "We have to move." Derek stared at him, uncomprehending. "Why are you helping me?" Ymir's eyes were hard, but there was something else there too. A flicker of understanding, of shared pain. "Because we were both wrong," he said. "The Kobali, Arya, all of us. We've been fighting the wrong battle." Derek nodded, a lump forming in his throat. Together they fought their way through the chaos, their weapons blazing. But it was a losing battle. Arya's forces had been decimated, and the Kobali just kept coming. Derek and Ymir found themselves cut off, surrounded by enemies on all sides. A blast caught Derek in the chest, sending him flying. He hit the ground hard, his vision swimming. He could taste blood in his mouth, could feel the life draining from his body. Ymir crawled to his side, his own wounds mortal. "We have to stop this," he whispered, his voice ragged. "The killing, the hatred, it has to end." Derek nodded, his breath coming in shallow gasps. "Find a way," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "A way for us to live in peace. Promise me." Ymir's eyes met his, a solemn vow passing between them. "I promise," he said. As the life faded from Derek's eyes, he saw a vision of the future. A future where humanity and the other races of the galaxy found a way to coexist, to build something greater than themselves. It was a beautiful dream, one he knew he would not live to see. But as the darkness claimed him, Derek knew that his fight had not been in vain. The seeds of change had been planted, and though the road ahead would be demanding and tough, there was still hope for a brighter tomorrow. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.